Before the presentation of the next award, which is in the category of sound, I'd like to tell you that the Board of Governors has voted a Special Achievement Award for sound effects editing of The Black Stallion to Mr. Alan Splet. He is unable to be here tonight. It always happens. First George C. Scott doesn't show, then Marlon Brando, and now Alan Splet. But Mr. Splet, wherever you are, we'll see that your Oscar gets to you. Congratulations.
It's fun working with industrial environments, though, because you can you have a lot of leeway in what you can do with the sounds.
I started working with Al in Philadelphia on the film called The Grandmother, and I was supposed to work with Bob Collum. But Bob was busy, and he said, I met Bob at the door, and he said, David, I feel bad, telling you this, but I'm going to be too busy to work with you, but I've hired an assistant, Alan Splet, and he will be working with you. And I looked over, and there was Al in this little shiny black suit. Al was as like a broom, and I stepped across the room, and I shook his hand and felt the bones rattle in his arm. And I thought to myself, this is not going to work out.
I probably had met Alan in passing because I'd made other movies in San Francisco, and Alan was sort of in the East Bay. I was working more out of Zoetrope and doing films like The Wanderers, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and so forth. But really we had done The Right Stuff, and we were mixing it over at Fantasy in Berkeley. And Alan, I think, was working on Blue Velvet, and Alan and Ann and their two children would always be, we were all on the same floor. So we were there for months and months and months with our crew, we just became friends, and our offices were there. So over the next couple of years, we were in the Fantasy building, and then when it came time to do Unbearable Lightness of Being, who better to do, the sound design than Alan. So, that was really the first official thing we had worked on.
I didn't know Alan was a musician, and I found it very interesting, particularly to know he was a cellist. But sometimes he'd say to me, or next morning after a hard day or something, hey, did you get some rest last night or something? He'd say, yes, I went home, and the kids and Anne, and we went back, and I played a little, and, he was a man of few words. So I pictured him, as if in some painting, almost, at home after a day of, let's say, dissonant sounds of some kind, and he would just clean it all out with some cool, sonorous cello sounds, and that's the picture that comes to mind.
I think I first saw Alan just kind of wandering around the halls at Zoetrope. He was beginning to work on The Black Stallion, and I was working on Apocalypse Now as one of Walter's assistants. And Alan had already been doing sound work for 8 or 10 years before that. We were all kind of in awe of him, partly because of Eraserhead. Eraserhead was this movie that David Lynch directed, and he and Alan worked on it for years because they kept running out of money. And it didn't make a huge splash in terms of box office, but it really sent creative shockwaves through the whole film community. But yeah, I saw this tall, lanky, very skinny, bearded guy wandering around, and somebody said, oh yeah, that's Alan Splet. He did Eraserhead. And I introduced myself to him and wound up recording a couple of things for him on The Black Stallion.
There weren't any we didn't have any libraries, so everything had to be made. So there's lots of recording and then fiddling with the recording with the equipment that you have until it sounds right and there's a mood. So Eraserhead was an industrial world. Al and I made a lot of sounds in our living room, and we would sometimes just have a session. Everybody had to be real quiet, and we would just gather little things together and see what sounds came out. And it was really fantastic and fun, really fun.
Alan and I would work very closely, and then Alan would work alone. You know, I would sometimes come to him with ideas, he would come to me with ideas. We had so much fun. I mean, it was just this fun relationship of discovery. People, can't fully, if you haven't done this in a film and been with artists of the level of Alan Splet, you can't understand that. So often films, the sound effects are farmed out. You get them back in 8 weeks, where there's somebody who's fighting with the music guy. But when it's a harmonious, creative thing, and Alan could only work that way. I think that was the only way Alan could work. When you have that kind of thing, as we did, as I say, there was always that room with Alan Splet in it, and that was always a room of fun for me. There was always something beautiful going on in that room, and it was the excitement of sound.
Yeah, I remember when we were working on Never Cry Wolf, David Parker and I were doing production sound while they were shooting the movie up in the Yukon and British Columbia, and Alan came up to record Wolves. David and I had been making some recordings of Wolves, but Alan wanted to get in on it, and we had such a great time. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and I remember watching Alan work doing that recording, and I remember learning from him, just observing him using recording techniques that might not have occurred to me. And I just remember, what a great guy he was to hang out with.
What I got from him was, I learnt patience from him, I think, firstly. You had to come up with inspired ideas that would make something work, using silence here and there, or a single sound. And so he would never stop. He would always be pushing further. We should try this, or we could try that. And the two-dimensionality of film, and the missing third dimension, and how sound can create that dimension. If you close your eyes with tracks of the caliber of Alan Splet's, then it is three-dimensional. You are in a three-dimensional space. You're walking through a hall, or you can feel it around you. But he gave you a three-dimension, deepened the picture.
I used to say, picture dictates sound, but sometimes it's the other way around. Sounds will conjure an image, and so the sound is what came first. I think every director would realize it's 50% of the picture, and to get it to marry to the picture is the trick. So it's not just a sound effect for a sound effect, it's in that world, it marries to it. And you work and work and work till you get that. And Al, because of his good ears and his technical ability, he would record things that had like maximum power. And he just painstakingly get these, fantastic recordings. It was really beautiful. And I still use some of these Fintorn winds that he got. And they're just beautiful. They just make you, soar out. It's really great.
I think another common misconception about sound is that, the higher fidelity, the better. And that's not always the case. Just because something was recorded 30 years ago or 50 years ago doesn't mean that it can't have enormous value. One of the great things that Alan said to me was, we were talking about the ancient rivalry between sound and picture. And Alan said, but the advantage we have is that sound is a heart thing. And wow, that struck me. Brings chills even now, especially knowing that he's not with us anymore. But what he meant was that sound affects us deeply in ways that often visual images can't. And the sound doesn't have to be, recorded 2496, or it doesn't have to have, 15 channels. It can be a mono recording. And these libraries that were assembled in the 70s and 80s, they're just full of gold in terms of the storytelling potential in those sounds.
It's been a wonderful experience bringing Alan back to mind for this project. And one feels a sense of loss again. And selfishly, that I can't call him up and get him to do a picture or go and see his work on someone else's picture. But in a sense, I think it's important to know, that only half the team has passed on, because his wife Anne was the other half of the team. One mustn't forget to celebrate the other half of the team who lives on and works on, and that she and she alone knows what share of those sounds that we have all discussed belong to her and were created by her. So I end my comments today by saying goodbye, Alan, thank you, and hello, Anne, and thank you.
Yeah, I was always amazed that they could work together so well and be a couple. And I think it speaks volumes about how great and deep their relationship was, that collaboration happened. I remember them going out and doing horse recordings for the Black Stallion. And Alan and Anne devised these mic rigs to attach to the horses, just the horses' bodies and the saddles and bridles, etc., so that they could get close-up recordings of the horse's breath, etc. And I don't think anybody had ever done that before, certainly not with a horse. I don't know of anybody who'd ever done that with any kind of animal, gone to that extent to collect several channels of recordings at once from a horse that's walking or running, etc. So they were a really innovative team, Anne and Alan, and I learned a lot from just watching them.
Anne has the chops to record sound, but the thing that I remember that I was the most thrilled with was the frap, a contact mic, and what kind of fantastic things you can get with the frap. I still have my frap. You think, well, you could get it with a regular microphone, but you put the microphone on something, it's completely different than near it. And so you get a whole nother thing. It can open up another world. It's real good.
I think the idea that a lot of this material has never been released before, that it's new, that we may have heard sort of versions of it in movies that we've seen and loved in the past, but to be able to hear those isolated tracks, and at some point on most projects you just need a tone or a mood for a particular sound, and it's very often it's not the literal sound of that the object would make. Some real emotional, deep, sort of ambiguous feeling that you need behind a sound, or you'll layer in something else which tells you about the density or the weight of a sound. So knowing that these sounds are coming from a wealth of sort of movies that are very, very well known and very well thought of, it's almost like a behind the scenes in a way of things like Eraserhead and movies like that, where I don't know, you could almost imagine an entire other universe with those sounds in place, but still that somehow has the DNA of those original movies.
I think first of all, like the darkness and also like grittiness, it's kind of fits perfectly with what I'm doing. And there's also something there's actually a lot of musicality in the sound, both in terms of rhythm, but also like tonalities. Some of them have like both elements, machinery sound. Some of them sound like something you could just put into a horror movie, and you would have like a perfect score.
But I'd like to think that when people hear these sounds, Alan and Anne recorded and designed in the 70s and 80s, that it'll lead them to explore more of the work that was done during that time, and maybe check out The Elephant Man if they haven't seen The Elephant Man, or any number of the other movies that Alan and Anne did such amazing work on. So I think that's one value, that those sounds will lead to further exploration and discovery. And I think the sounds will also just be valuable as raw material for whatever kind of project you're working on that needs sound. I can tell you that when these sounds are available, I'm going to check them out because I know that I'll be able to use them in new and creative ways. So, if I'm anxious to get my hands on these sounds, then you should be too.